In this section, the therapist demonstrates the techniques which may be applied for problems associated with the back and spine, and to help relax muscular tension and increase energy flow in the client's lower, middle and upper back. Before commencing energy healing, it is advisable to have your own battery fully charged before endeavouring to help others to charge their battery. How can you charge your own energy healing battery? Rub your two hands together. Rub them together vigorously until you can feel them warming up. Next, move your hands slightly apart and try to tune in with the feeling in the palms of your hands. For some people, this may feel like a tingling sensation. For some, it may feel like hot or cold air between the palms of your hands. In this demonstration, the client is lying face down on a therapy table. The therapist begins by standing on the person's left-hand side. His hands are gentle but firm. He places his right hand on the person's right shoulder. He places his left hand on the person's left shoulder. He is now directing a flow of energy across the upper spine and back area between the person's two shoulders. He holds this position for 3 minutes. Next, the therapist places his two hands across the person's body just above the waist. He is now directing a flow of energy across the thoracic area of the back. He holds this position for 3 minutes. He then places his two hands across just below the person's hips. He is now directing a flow of energy through the hips across the lower area of the back and spine. He holds this position for 3 minutes. In this section, the therapist demonstrates the technique U, called diagonal energy flows. The therapist places his right hand below the person's right hip and his left hand on the person's left shoulder. He is now directing a flow of energy diagonally through muscles, tendons, ligaments, tissues and cells in the person's back. He holds this position for 3 minutes. The therapist then places his left hand on the person's right shoulder and his right hand just below the person's left hip. He is now directing a flow of energy in the opposite diagonal direction through the person's back. He holds this position for 3 minutes. In this demonstration, the therapist stands on the client's right-hand side. First, he makes a V shape with his left hand by creating the V shape between his ring finger and his middle finger. The therapist applies the V bioenergy drive by placing his left hand with the V shape on the spine below the particular vertebrae where the nerve is exiting that may be trapped or damaged. He holds his right hand above the top of the person's head, not touching the head. This V bioenergy drive technique may help to create a direct flow of energy between the V shape of his left hand and the energy point in the palm of his right hand positioned above the top of the person's head. Alternatively, the therapist can place his right hand on an area of the spine closer to his left hand to drive a beam of energy through a shorter distance between his two hands. He can apply the V bioenergy drive using his two hands in different positions up along the spine in order to apply this technique to the entire spine. He holds each position for 3 to 5 minutes. The therapist demonstrates the technique W, called long spinal flows. He places his left hand on this cushion below the sacrum. The palm of his left hand should be facing up towards the person's head. He will not change his left hand from this position for these spinal flows. The therapist places his right hand, palm facing downwards, on the first marker on the person's spine about 6 inches from his left hand in the lumbar region. He is now directing an energy flow in this area of the spine between his two hands. He holds this position for 1 minute. He then moves his right hand about halfway up the spine and places it on the second marker just above the person's waist. He holds this position for 1 minute. Then he moves his right hand to the upper spine and places it on the third marker in the cervical area. He holds this position for 1 minute. Finally, he moves his right hand to above the top of the person's head, the crown area. He holds his hand 2 to 3 inches out from the person's head, not touching the head. He holds this position for 1 minute. Now, watch the therapist demonstrate the second set of spinal flows. These flows are down along the spine. The therapist holds his right hand over the crown area of the head, not touching the head. Then he places his left hand on the upper spine in the space between the third marker and the back of the neck, continuing to direct an energy flow between his two hands. He holds this position for 1 minute. He continues to hold his right hand over the crown area of the head, and then he places his left hand on the upper spine in the space between the third marker and the second marker. He holds this position for 1 minute. Then he places his left hand in the space between the second marker and the first marker. His right hand is still over the crown area of the head. He holds this position for 1 minute. He then places his left hand below the sacrum back on the cushion with his left hand facing up towards the person's head. He holds this position for 1 minute. If you are able to reach to stretch your hands for this last position, you can remain holding your right hand above the top of the person's head, and your left hand is placed back in the first position on the cushion below the sacrum, with the palm of your left hand facing up towards the person's head. You can hold this position for 1 minute. If you are not able to reach for this last position, you can place your right hand on the spine between marker 2 and marker 3, and place your left hand on the cushion below the sacrum, with your left hand facing up towards the person's head. You then hold this position for 1 minute. By using this spinal flow technique, You energize the spine in all areas as you move your hands to different positions up along the spine, and you energize other areas of the spine that may not have been covered as you come back down along the spine, energizing each area of the spine. Short spinal flows can be used in addition to the long spinal flows, or as an alternative to long spinal flows, if the client is unable to lie down or is sitting on a chair or in a wheelchair. He places his two hands on the person's lower spine. His left hand is placed on the sacrum, the lowest area of the spine, and his right hand is placed just above his left hand on the spine. His two hands are now energizing the area of the lower spine. He holds this position for 3 minutes. The therapist then places both of his hands with the right hand above the left hand on the upper spine. His two hands are now energizing the upper spine. He holds this position for 3 minutes. This short spinal flows technique can be repeated as often as required. Additional hand positions may be necessary to cover a larger area of the spine. The therapist can stand or sit on either side of the client unless otherwise stated, and left and right hands can be interchanged depending on the therapist's choice.